Binge the full week of The Ray Taylor Show ad-free over at inspireddisorder.com/plus.
This is The Ray Taylor Show.
Welcome to The Ray Taylor Show, where I bring you the reviews on the latest movies and TV shows, as well as classic and foreign films. I'm your host, Ray Taylor, and on this podcast, I'll be talking about all things film and television. Whether you're looking for a new show to binge or want to know if that blockbuster is worth the trip to the theater, or just want to hear my thoughts on a classic or foreign film, I've got you covered. So join me every Monday, Wednesday, or Friday for a new episode, and let's dive into the world of film and television together. On this episode, I am talking about another Alex Garland film, as I have been for the past 2 Wednesdays. I've been watching and talking about Alex Garland films, a new and upcoming director. He has 3 films that he has created thus far. 2 weeks ago, I watched and reviewed Ex Machina. Last week, I talked about Annihilation. And this week, for my first viewing and first time discussing this film, his third film, Men, which came out last year, 2022, written and directed, as I said, by Alex Garland. This has a very small cast. I believe this was actually filmed during the pandemic, which makes sense for the small cast, as well as thematically plays into this movie as well. This movie stars Jessie Buckley, Rory Kinnear, Papa Esiedu, and Gail Rankin. The basic plot of this movie: a young woman goes on a solo vacation to the English countryside following the death of her ex-husband. Overall, this movie, similar to Annihilation in a lot of ways, the pacing very slow. This movie confusing at times, if not constantly. This movie does have an element of fear, which was nice. This is a scary film. And I actually think I loved it. I think despite the fact that it has a lot of comparisons to Annihilation, which I didn't really enjoy. That movie I had watched for the second time. I had given it another chance. And Annihilation, it's slow, confusing, and nearly put me to sleep both times I watched it. Where this movie, slow, confusing, but I was engaged and I was into it, and this movie goes insane. And I love insane. This movie takes an even bigger swing than Annihilation, and is probably, the fact that despite it being confusing, it definitely had a lot more for me to hold on to. And the metaphors that are pretty heavy-handed, the ideas that he's trying to get across, very heavy-handed, but the way in which he does it and the crazy, horrific, and surreal nature in which he does it, I loved. I love this movie. I don't know what to tell you. And I could see many people not liking this movie. I went back and listened to other podcasts that have reviewed this movie, and while I agree with a lot of the things they said, they have been negative. They happen to have had more of a negative take on this movie, where I appreciated and loved all of the things that they thought were negatives, I felt were positives. So I love this movie, and I'm glad, because for me, Ex Machina was good. I enjoyed Ex Machina. Simple, kind of a fun, kind of a thriller, sci-fi thriller in a way. And then Annihilation, definitely a bigger swing for him. Definitely somebody that's working with a bigger budget, working with bigger ideas. But it was a miss for me. And kind of felt like Alex Garland, maybe it's just a director that I'm not that into. The things and stories he wants to tell, how he likes to tell stories, maybe they just don't connect with me, and that's fine. There's a lot of very interesting, very well-renowned directors that I just don't get and just don't, like. And I was worried that maybe Alex Garland was that, and this movie, definitely my favorite Alex Garland film, because it is so crazy. Because of the ending of this movie. I love and a lot of that, not only the visual aspects of it, the horrific aspects of the graphic nature of this movie, all added to my enjoyment, but also the fact that it is very much every aspect of this movie, the themes, everything it's trying to communicate is men and the worst parts of men, which, despite the fact that I happen to be a man, the way I grew up, I was raised, had a single mom, had no dad in my life, didn't really have any male figures in my life. So, and in a lot of ways don't relate to a lot of dudes that have that thing where it's clear that like their version of being a man is to have all of these character traits that are the most toxic aspects to society. This delusion that being a certain type of asshole is somehow the credentials to being an alpha male is absurd. And this movie highlights a lot of those things, and I highly agree with, how horrible men can be, how like the many, like, so the fact that it is very much heavy-handed, very much on the nose with what it's trying to communicate, I don't have a problem with. I mean, it's a movie titled Men, and this movie is all about the worst aspects of men as told in a horror story. This is a horror movie. So I have a lot to say about this movie, so buckle up. I'll get into spoilers later, but it could be a long episode. Obviously, if you're already listening and or watching to this, you know how long it is before I do. I am only a few minutes in, and I know this is going to be a long one. But let's get into my thoughts on this movie. Right? This is a wild ride, this movie. And despite it being kind of slow, it's the places we go is like crazy. Right, this movie is kind of part haunted house, which I don't think I've heard anybody compare it to that, but it is definitely part haunted house. The idea that she is being haunted is literally brought up in the film, and in some ways, and it's not just necessarily the house that is haunted, it is more that she is being haunted. The house being her mind, being the place she is existing in at any given moment. She is the one being haunted house. This movie is also kind of part descent into madness caused by that, which happens in a lot of haunted house films, like A Shining, for example. This movie is also very much a big part commentary on toxic men and the contagious nature of damage. How the toxicity and the traits that make men disgusting and horrible, how those things are passed on, right? The idea of hurt people, right? That idea of things giving birth to the next generation of damaged men. And I think in some ways society is becoming aware of a lot of those things. And of course, there is the part of society that's digging their heels in and thinks that any kind of societal change or behavioral change is in some ways diminishing the need for men or the existence of men, which I think is absolutely absurd. I think it is more people just not wanting to change and being comfortable and very happy with the fact that they are disgusting human beings. So, I enjoy what this, like, it's a punch, and it's not trying to, there's no subtlety to what this movie is doing. This is a movie that is trying to hit you in the face with, like, showing all of the many ways in which men can be absolutely disgusting humans, disgusting creatures. Anyways, and that's not to say that I am immune to maybe having some of these traits in my life. It has been an ever expanding journey of my life to, be aware of how I am, how I've acted in the past, how I'd like to be a better person. I am actively, in many ways, trying to be a better person, and it's impossible to improve without reflection. So I appreciate this movie for really holding a mirror up, a very crazy, surreal mirror up to the many issues that, I think there's a lot of people in our society that just want to ignore. In both, and when I say people in our society, I'm not just saying the men want to ignore these things. There are a lot of women that love these types of men, and because of that, because of the same, I'm sure, type of damage, they do not want to really confront the reality of how absolutely disgusting men can be, right? And the idea of how these things kind of keep going, keep existing, how this type of existence and trauma and damage keeps repeating itself. So, all that stuff. This movie's dark. This movie's twisted, right? It's very thought-provoking and also terrifying, right? I was scared at moments, right? I felt uneasy in moments, right? It's a movie that will viscerally tap into whatever it is inside of you if you're willing to open up and just really go into the one solid, strong message of what this movie's trying to tell, right? Right. There were times where I was lost, right? But I felt similarly like I was lost in watching Annihilation, but in this case, as opposed to Annihilation, I felt like there was still enough for me to grab onto, right? The fact that it has that central metaphor, that central point that it's trying to get across was enough for me. And in knowing that it was only really tackling that one thing, right? But also, even within that one thing, there is a plethora, there is a spectrum of ways that is expressed, allowed me to understand and see the many ways in which this movie, and makes this movie make sense a lot more than Annihilation did anyway, right? Despite the fact that and I think that's why it helps that it's blunt and in your face, right? Yet still, it requires you to think, it requires you to interpret what you're being shown, right? It's the way it's communicating all these things is, it's not just telling you straight out, but it is showing you straight out in a lot of ways, right? And there's definitely a lot of moments of beauty in this film. The scenery, the location, very beautiful. There are beautiful moments in this movie, but they're constantly contrast with death and deterioration and fear and pain. So not only do the beautiful, tranquil type of moments stand out, but they are constantly contrasted by and interrupted by the kind of the decay of life, which I appreciate, right? And you see her pain for what, not only what she's gone through and witnessed, but right, the pain of life itself, the pain of the trauma that she's experienced, right? The cycle of damage that continues to happen, and the fear in a lot of ways of perpetuating those same outcomes, that fear that those things could be passed on to new life, right? All of these types of ideas are all encapsulated in this film, right? And there are things that I saw watching this movie that will forever be burned into my memory, right? Just as the crow, the breastfeeding scene with the crow and the witch that will forever be burned in my head, there is the end of this movie will forever and always be burned, will seared into my gray matter. I don't think that's a bad thing. It's a crazy thing, and I think that's one of the many reasons why. Like, if a movie can affect me in that way, then I give it a lot of credit for having that kind of staying power. And there are questions and themes that ran through this movie that will also stay with me, right? Because I appreciate it. And it's a movie that I want to talk about to other people, right? And that's why I went back and listened to one of my favorite podcasts / Filmcast, the Filmcast. Listened to them for over a decade. I really appreciate their views and insights on films, and I disagreed with the majority of opinions that they had about this movie. But it is a movie that definitely is super interesting, and I found I got a lot out of it, and I think we all saw similar things, but as far as the appreciation for it, I don't know, man. I appreciate it a lot more. And maybe that's just because I have had to deal with in my life the worst types of dudes, and I don't know. Maybe it's a perspective thing. Maybe who knows what it is. But it's definitely a movie that makes me want to, talk to people about it, see what they thought about it, right? And would also love to hear more women's views on this movie. I would imagine there are aspects of this movie that really hit home for a lot of women. But I would also imagine the graphic nature, especially of the end of this film, may be too much. Maybe, And plus, there are women that defend the toxic type of men, which is absolutely insane. But definitely a movie I would love to hear people's opinions on. And it's a movie that seems to touch on and trigger a lot of different things that could, relate to people differently, depending on their personal experiences, because it does show the spectrum of ways men could be toxic or horrible douchebags. It can definitely touch on all of those different things. And it's, at the heart of it, a horror movie about a woman haunted by men in all of its forms, in all of his forms, its forms. Anyway, so I do want to get into spoilers. I want to talk about specifics of this movie, and this is where we may take some time. Let's take a quick break from this episode because I want to talk about, are you looking to add some unique and expressive artwork to your home, office, or wardrobe? Look no further than the Many Faces series by Ray Taylor. That's me. These abstract paintings on paper explore the endless possibilities of the human face, capturing unique expressions of emotion, mood, tone, and energy in just a few minimal features. Now you can bring these stunning and thought-provoking pieces into your own space with high-quality prints and t-shirts, featuring designs from the Many Faces series. Or take home a one-of-a-kind original piece for your collection. Don't miss out on this opportunity to add some original and expressive artwork to your home, office, or wardrobe. Head on over to InspiredDisorder.com to browse and purchase original artworks, prints, and t-shirts from the Many Faces series today. And now, back to the show. So spoilers from here on out. I want to talk about details of this crazy movie. I absolutely want to talk about the end of this movie. So from here on out, you have been warned. I will be talking about spoilers of the 2022 movie Men, which I watched on, I believe, Paramount Plus. I believe. So it is out there in the world. Has been out for about a month, I believe. And that's why I watched the other Alex Garland films to then watch this one, because I noticed this one was finally available. And, I do enjoy getting to know how directors like to tell stories. Makes me appreciate their work more and gets me in the right mindset to enjoy their film. So anyway, I definitely want to dig into the details of this crazy movie. So right, this movie, it starts with like music's playing. It's very like kind of tranquil. Music's playing. It's raining. She has a bloody nose for some reason. And there's this slow motion of this man falling past her balcony, right? Which slowly we find out what all of that is, right? And just that man being another representation of how a way in which men can present themselves as being a horrible person, right? And then we have this like long, tranquil drive through beautiful countryside in England, right? She gets to this place. She like rented this house to take a vacation after this tragedy that happened, right? And when she gets there, she eats an apple off of a tree. Very on the nose, the Eve eating the apple, right? The original sin, right? This is somewhere in the UK. And while she's eating the apple, there's a man watching her, right? The voyeuristic nature of men, right? And he jokes later on. She goes inside. He jokes about her eating the apple, referencing just driving home that point, if you didn't get it, the forbidden fruit idea, right? And she just left this half-eaten apple on the counter. Like, that bothered me more than on the nose reference to Eve eating the apple, right? But in that moment, he also warns, don't flush your tampons, right? Don't. It's just like, it is, this character, Jeffrey, is a guy who's pretty sweet-natured, but of an old-school mentality where, despite him being a nice guy, still says things that are, you know, can be taken offensive or on some level misogynistic. He is like the lightest version of how a man maybe would probably rethink being, right? In moments. But by far, out of the all, and this is played by what's his face? Rory Kinnear, who plays all of the characters. The only other man in this is her ex-husband, Papa Isidu, who is the guy that was falling from the balcony. All the men that appear in this town while she's in this house are all played by Rory Kinnear, which took me a beat to realize that like they were all being played by the same guy, which is amazing. But also goes to highlight the fact that all of these different characters that are played by Rory are all different manifestations of how men can be disgusting, right? And his character of Jeffrey is the nicest of them, the least painful of all of them, right? And then we get a flashback to her breaking up with her husband and him threatening to commit suicide if she leaves her. Like, this guy is so much trying to play the victim in this situation and so much trying to scare her into staying with him. Just like a disgusting behavior to like threaten suicide. Like, oh, you have to stay with me or I'll kill myself, right? Just kind of disgusting. Right? Then there's another cut back to another beautiful part where she's like in this tunnel, in this echoey tunnel, and she's like having almost this sing song with the echoes, and then contrasted with the man at the end of the tunnel running after her, right? It's always like beautiful. It's like, oh, we can't have beautiful things, right? There's another like thing of being pursued, hunted by men, right? The fear of what could happen if somebody caught her, right? Then she sees a naked guy. She's taking a picture of this old rundown house, and there's this naked guy that just appears that's in the picture, right? Very weird. Like, these weird things are happening. And I haven't, like, it's slow. I don't really know. Aside from the Apple thing, like, I don't know if that's what this movie's about. And then, you know, as we go on, right, it shows what this movie's about. And as far as when we get these flashbacks to when she's in her apartment with her ex, like, it's unclear if those are memories or if those just are thoughts that she's had, right? And specifically one where she's walking down a street and she sees her husband, like, kind of dead on the sidewalk, leg broken, arm kind of impaled by this wrought iron fence, right? That, like, did she actually see that? Is that something she witnessed? Is that what she's leaving? Like, did this guy actually kill himself? Because the way it's portrayed is not like, oh, she saw him like that. It is like, it's definitely her either recalling something that she actually saw, or it's a dream she had of fears because she broke up with him and his threats that she had, right? Which either could be true, either are horrible, right? And this is, like, all while she's just kind of relaxing in the bath, right? It's constantly this contrast that's going on. And then she sees the naked guy outside while she's, you know, giving her friend a FaceTime tour, right? Definitely creepy, right? As the door is, like, cracked open and she kind of sees the shadow move past it. And then him, after she closes the door, which is a cool, like, old school lock. I really kind of appreciate, for whatever reason, I really appreciated the locks on the doors in this movie. Very cool. And then seeing him, like, reach through the mail slot, right? And it's just, she calls the phone, you know, 999 or whatever the emergency number is, right? And then cuts to a memory of her ex freaking out, her texting her friend, and then him taking her phone, right? Like, she's scared of him in this moment. He takes her phone, right? And is trying to force her to put in the password, right? Cut to the naked guy getting arrested outside, and you have a female cop that's very sympathetic to how terrifying that can be, right? Contrasted with, of course, the male cop, also played by Rory Kinnear, not really seeing what the big deal is. Especially, we see that later when we find out that they just let him free. But you have, like, this beautiful countryside, right? And she goes to this creepy church, right? And she has thinking back, these memories of after what happened, after her ex punched her in the face, right? That gave her that bloody nose, right? Telling him to get out, right? She's like, I had enough. She's like, get out of here. I need you to get out. She's like, I'm tired of this. Like, I don't care if you're going to kill yourself. Do whatever you're going to do, but you're not going to be here anymore. She's just done with his gaslighting bullshit, done with his bullshit altogether, pushes him out the door, tells him to kill himself. She doesn't care. She's never going to see him again anyway. So whatever he decides to do with his life, that's on him, right? And then cut to her as she's in this church, remembering this, just her wailing, right? Clearly still traumatized by what I assume at this point, especially her reaction, that maybe he did kill himself. Maybe that was that thought, that memory she had. She did see him on the sidewalk, broken and impaled and dead, right? And just seeing how just clearly still traumatized she is, right? And maybe blaming herself, right? Because that's what he did. He was setting up this whole thing that, like, oh, I'll show you, right? You're, like, making sure she feels blame, make sure she feels at fault, right? So much of this movie, one of the major aspects of how men are just disgusting and horrible are the victim blaming in every way. Right? Oh, it's your fault. You like, what did you do to drive him to that? Which you see later as she goes outside, she meets a kid who has the face of Rory Kinnear, which is crazy. And because she doesn't want to play hide and seek, he calls her a bitch, right? And then the pastor who saw her wailing, but that didn't console her or anyway, didn't even make himself known, kind of introduces himself after this kid, this creepy kid, leaves. And then you see the father doing the things like, well, what did you do to what? Like, you must have driven him to treat you that way. Like, what did you do? It is clearly your fault that he treated you like that, right? Which is so much of laying on just other examples of how disgusting. And even still, like, she gets up and leaves, and this dude puts his hand where she was sitting on the bench to, like, feel the warmth from her butt while she was sitting on this bench, and he, like, puts on, like, it's just like he is the creepiest of creep guys, right? And, of course, he's a priest, which isn't crazy. Priests have done some of the most horrific things to children throughout history. So this is probably one of the most kindest portrayals of a priest. And of course, we get more of, the whole idea still goes back to the eating of the apple. Women are at fault for original sin, right? If Eve didn't eat that apple, man, we would be living in paradise, right? Like, starting from religion has been blaming women, and it's no different, right? This is a cycle of indoctrination and grooming that have gone on in men for existence, right? And I think probably the naked guy that shows up that constantly becomes more tree-like, right? First he's just naked, then he's like naked and cut up, and then you see him like putting leaves in himself, and towards the end he's got more like branches growing out of himself. I think more he represents Adam in a lot of ways, and how, he was the aspect of original sin as well, and how, like, we can't be naked in nature anymore because of women. We had to start covering ourselves up because she ate that apple. Like, I feel like it ties in. Even the altar inside of this church was creepy, right? On the front of it, there's a leaf that looks like the leaf is wailing. And on the backside, the side that only the priest can see and not the congregation, you have a carving of a woman, a naked woman, right? You see her breasts and her nipples, and then her vagina is like spread open, which by no means is crazy to see in a very old church. Not at all surprising to see. And then we finally get the missing pieces to the whole thing with her ex, right? After she kicked her ex out, right, he went to the neighbors upstairs and went through their apartment and was going to he was going to break back into her apartment by climbing through to the balcony. And she's like, I don't know if he slipped and fell or if he let go on purpose. Obviously, neither would surprise her. But the fact that he was trying to break in anyway both of those things are 100% on him. Like, she's still in some ways blaming herself. It's like, if I didn't do that, then maybe he wouldn't have tried to do that, right? She's still internalizing that the victim blaming that all of these men are doing. And that's when the priest puts his hand on her leg and is like, well, what did you do to drive him to that, right? Very pervy. And then she goes to the pub, right? And that's when I finally realized that all the white men are the same actor, right? Because there's a bunch of, there's like 5 dudes all played by Rory Kinnear. I'm like, okay, kind of thought so with the priest, but then because you had Jeffrey, the bartender, there's like some douchebag guy, and then I think somebody else. And, they all seem to like exude the kind of wide-ranging plethora of versions of toxic male traits, right? And you see the cop sympathizing with the homeless guy rather than her fears of being stalked, right? That's where you see that cop who's one of the people at the pub, right? And you also see Jeffrey not allowing her to buy her own drink. Like, no, I'm going to, which again is the kind of, I don't know what the proper term is, where you're trying to be nice, but it's like accidentally like offensive, right? I forget the term, but definitely he's that version. And she's scared, so she's telling her friend how to get there, right? And the phone cuts out. She gets a creepy reply. I already know how to get there, you stupid bitch, right? So it's like all of these things, it's really showing up, and in the moment where she was talking to the priest is when he mentions, oh, it's like you're being haunted by this thing that happened to you. And that's where I picked up. It's like, oh, this is all like a haunting, right? Then it makes sense why all the men are the same. It makes sense why these weird things are happening, right? Just like they do in a haunted house story. It's like she is being haunted by men. If men were a supernatural force, whatever reason in this area, she is being haunted by all of the different male traits that are disgusting, and even they show themselves in that form via text message that is supposed to be from her friend, right? So like all of these things could be like in her mind, in her subconscious. Like they may not be happening, they may be happening. Just as a haunted house, it's the question of what's real, what's not, right? And maybe this guy, Rory Kinnear, is her father, could be like a projection of her father, right? And maybe that would explain why the only other man in this movie is a black man that she was married to. But instead of seeing all of the men in this area being played by that same black actor, they're all played by this white guy. And also, I would say white men have perpetuated the most atrocities in the world when you also consider white supremacy to be part of that. And even how white men have abused and traumatized and spread that trauma into black men because of the past. Even though this is England, there's still a white supremacy. Maybe they didn't have the same slavery thing that we had in America, but, So that would be my interpretation. I've heard it being questioned, why were all the men played by this one guy and not him? That would be my issue. Like that he is kind of a representation of her dad in some ways, and maybe she was damaged from her dad, right? Women having daddy issues. I think a lot of dudes that act like this have daddy issues, right? That's how daddy issues kind of show themselves in men in the most toxic ways, where you have these guys that are just trying to live up to and make their fathers proud by acting like the same kinds of assholes that they saw their father be, So that would be my interpretation, that he is like more of a representation of her father. And this is also where I'm starting to think, okay, this is a haunted house, right? Like this is a haunting. She's haunted by the memories of her ex, right? She's haunted by their breakup. She's haunted by his threat to killing himself, then the mental and physical abuse that he put on her, right? First, all of the mental abuse, threatening to kill himself, gaslighting her, trying to force her to, unlock her phone, all these things, and then ending with the physical violence of punching her in the face, right? She's haunted by all these things, and followed by what is a questionable death, right? Did he kill himself? Did he slip? And her blaming herself for all those things. These are like all the things that are haunting her and either causing her to visualize all these things, or this area, this place she goes to visit will manifest all of those fears into existence, as haunted houses tend to do. They tend to, fabricate and bring up and physicalize the worst fears you may have, right? Let's take a quick break right now to talk about, are you a fan of original artwork and live events? Look no further than the Many Faces series by Ray Taylor and the weekly live stream over at youtube.com/Inspired Disorder. This ongoing series explores the endless possibilities of the human face through abstract ink paintings on paper, capturing unique expressions of emotion, mood, tone, and energy in just a few minimal features. Join me every Thursday at 4:20 Pacific Time as I paint live. Follow the Many Faces series and discover the endless possibilities of the human face. Don't miss out on this opportunity to be part of the action and own a piece of original artwork by me, Ray Taylor. Head to youtube.com/Inspired Disorder every Thursday to catch the live stream, and visit inspireddisorder.com to browse and purchase the Many Faces artwork. And now, let's get back to the show. And just as women hate all men, kind of, I mean, it is a trend, acceptable, reasonable trend, right? They get out of bad relationships with a shitty guy. All men represent the things that she hates about men, right? All of those things kind of tie together in that moment. Then you start seeing even crazier stuff, right? Which just further makes this feel like a haunting, right? Where she sees the cop outside and she's yelling at him. He's not replying when she tries to talk to him, right? And then he just disappears, right? There's this just great practical effect of lights going out, right? This like censored light that just times out, goes out, and then he disappears. People disappear. Right, then you have all of the apples falling out of the tree, right? It's raining apples, right? Bringing back like, it is your fault that these things are happening to you, Harper, right? Right, then you have the douchebag from the bar all of a sudden appearing and running at her. Very terrifying, right? In a different way than the tunnel scene, right? He's right out in front. You can see him, and she barely gets inside, closing the door just in time, right? And her yelling no. Then you have a guy breaking the window, right? And then throwing a chair. She has a knife. She's in the kitchen, right? I'm freaked out. I'm freaked the fuck out right along with her, right? Because I don't know what's going on. She's literally being haunted by all of these different men that are played by the same actor, right? And then there's this banging on the door, right? And turns out she opens it. It's the nice guy, the nicer of all of them, Jeffrey, right? Out of all of them that could have shown up, he's the one guy where she's like relieved, which is a false relief, right? And then you kind of find out, right? He's the landlord guy. He comes in, and the window's actually broken, which is like constantly questioning like what's real, what's not real in this movie. Window's actually broken. You see that it's a crow that's dying on the kitchen floor, right? That's what broke the window and knocked over the chair. And she believes him that he doesn't think that she's lying. He believes that there was this naked guy that got released. The police let him go, right? They sympathize with this homeless guy versus her concerns and her fears about this guy potentially stalking her. So he's like, okay, he takes it upon himself to protect, right? He's like, I need to protect you because I'm a man and you're a woman. That's, he's nice, but it's like, okay, diminishing her a bit. And he decides to take a look around. And of course, he ends up disappearing on the lawn. And then we get this kind of trippy and intense moment, right? You get the naked guy that's all cut up. He's got leaves all in his cuts, right? He's back. He shows up, right? He blows dandelion seeds in her face. And then there's a lot of slow-mo imagery, right? Where she goes back inside and the naked guy reaches through the mail slot again and she stabs the knife through his arm, and then as he pulls the arm out, it splits his arm in half like a hot dog that's been microwaved too long, right? Which is a brutal scene. It is slow as he takes his hand out. Just cuts through the length of his hand. Absolutely brutal. Then you see the boy showing up, right? And the boy's hand is split open, right? So now you see that like all of these manifestations are of the same creature, right? Then you see the priest showing up, same split arms, and he gets stabbed, right? She runs away. She drives away, right? But then hits a guy on her way out. She gets out. Oh, shit, it's Jerry, right? The one guy. And, of course, Jerry then turns evil, right? Steals her car, and she's running now, so she's being chased. She's on foot. Jerry's in the car. She runs back she gets back to the house, gets back inside. She gets into the thing, right? Jerry crashes the car. Then through the shrubs into the yard comes the naked guy again. Same split hand, right? Now he's got a broken leg, right? Because when she hit Jerry, she broke his leg. So he's like continually being damaged. The naked tree man is back. And then we get to the reason why this movie really made me love it, right? And really made me solidify understanding this movie. And really, it really knocks home, for me, what this movie is trying to say. Not that it hasn't been constantly showing you all of these ways toxic men, but I think this really goes to communicate the true nature of why those things happen. As you see this tree guy who has a pregnant belly all of a sudden giving birth from a vaginal opening underneath his junk, right? Butthole, or he's got both. I don't know what it is, but he starts giving birth, right, to another, like all of the different versions, all of the actors that Rory Kinnear played are now one after the other giving birth to each other, crawling out of the previous version, covered in blood, all having the exact same damaged hand, the same broken leg, all giving birth to the next one. And in my view, that scene is how generationally men are passing down the damage and trauma to other men, not only in generational, but also you have the priest and the boy, very much a reasonable comparison considering how many boys have been abused by priests in the entire history of organized religion, how absolutely common that type of destruction happens, abuse happens, and how people who tend to be abused in that way will often then repeat that type of abuse to other people. That idea of hurt people is the same idea of a damaged man giving birth to creating another damaged man, right? And I think that whole idea is visualized literally with a man giving birth to another man, another manifestation of all of the same damage, of all of the same things that would make that person the horrible person they are, right? Because of all those damaged traits that they got. And even eventually, it finally turns into her ex-husband, right? Where the final version of that, and I think even in that, it is communicating how the race of black men is traumatized, are traumatized by the abuses of not just other men, but specifically of white men too. And I think it's showing in that all of the different ways abuse and trauma has been passed along, whether it's from priest to boy, whether it's from white man to black man, whether it's from, generation, old generation to young generation. In that moment, you're seeing this rebirth, right? You're seeing damaged men create damaged men, right? The cycle of men acting and behaving the way they do is passed down, right? Each version gives birth to the next, all the same damage until her ex finally comes out, the same split hand, the same, right, that was, and also knocks home these injuries, right? Because these are also the same injuries that he had in her memory of her ex-husband on the fence, how his arm was impaled by the fence, bifurcated. He broke his leg on the sidewalk, and seeing all of those same injuries expressed in all of these different men, completely like, oh, these are like, it just further highlights the connection that all these things happen, right? The idea, hurt people, right? Her ex was damaged from the abuse of men that came before him, not to take away their responsibility and their actions, but you see that, how in life, trauma, damage, things are passed on. It is a cycle, generational trauma passed on. And all he wants from her is for her to love him, right? But it's like that's what he wants, but the way it's expressed is so damaged, right? And then her friend finally shows up the next morning. And that's where we see that makes me feel like this is a haunting. All of these things actually happen. She actually, there is something about this place where all of her worst fears are manifested into reality, where she was actually being chased down by this figure, this haunting, this apparition that actually crashed her car. She actually saw these things give birth to each other over and over again. And you see the next morning, you see the trail of afterbirth from these men giving birth to each other over and over again as it goes into the home. And then you also see that her friend is very pregnant, and that also, I would say, brings back the reason why these men were giving birth to more damaged men, in that maybe also Harper's fear is that her friend, maybe giving birth to a boy, will then be passing on those same damaged traits to another generation, right? It's just another part of her fear, this fear of her friend giving birth to another horrible man that was manifested in this haunting. The scene itself, graphic, insane, but also clarified, in my opinion, clarified all of the things it was trying to say. And I appreciated kind of the on-the-nose aspect of it. But I don't know. I thought it was perfect. If not for that last scene where they're giving birth to each other, and then you see her ex, and then you see her friend who's pregnant, it's like, oh, it all makes sense. Like, these are the manifestations of all of her worries and all of her fears and all of her trauma in relation to men, past, present, whether that guy is her father, whether it's her ex, whether it's the fear that her friend could be giving birth to the next toxic man to ruin somebody else's life. All of it, right? Right, this movie in so many ways is about the horror of men. Like if the worst aspects of men were a horror movie and manifested in a haunting, that's this movie, right? From the mental and physical, abusive partner, right? The gaslighting and then threatening to commit suicide, blaming you while also playing the victim. Too many white men played, like, including all the different white men that played by Rory Kinnear, like all of them different expressions of the different flavors of male toxicity, right? From the passive to the overt, some more innocent than others were egregious, right? Obviously you have like the Jeffrey guy, very kind of subtle and passive, versus, the cop or her ex really are definitely more the overt. And the ideas of generational trauma, hurt people, the abuse of religious leaders to children, white men to black men, the gender bases of systematic abuse, right? One form of giving birth to the next, right? From person to person, man to man, these abuses just and aspects of horrible men just keep getting passed down through generation to generation. And never at any point taking responsibility. Always blaming the woman for all of these moments, whether it's Eve eating the apple in the Garden of Eden and Harper in the front yard of this house, right? And seeing how the weight of all that is focused on women, specifically Harper, who is literally like haunted by all the worst aspects of men. And also the fear of her pregnant friend, who I assume is having a boy, right? Would make sense. Right? Considering that would be like if that was the gender reveal for her friend, like seeing man give birth to man, all damaged and disgusting and horrible. Probably one of the worst gender reveals you could have. And also the self-torture, right? Where she blames herself on some level, which I assume many women internalize that, right? Internalize the flood of abuse. And I feel like this movie and Annihilation are both communicating big ideas, but this movie it felt like it connected with me, and I definitely understood a lot more. It's definitely more on the nose, but I appreciated that. Obviously, it's a movie that will forever live rent-free, right? Will forever haunt my own head. It will live rent-free in my own head. But anyway, that's my thoughts on this movie. I want to thank you all for tuning into this episode of The Ray Taylor Show. I hope you enjoyed my thoughts on Men, the movie. And don't forget to tune in every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday for new episodes of movie reviews or TV reviews. And join the conversation on your favorite podcast platform by leaving a rating or a comment. Or if you're doing so on YouTube, leave a rating, comment, subscribe, all that stuff. If you're watching this on YouTube, I should say. Until next time, enjoy the show.
New episodes of The Ray Taylor Show come out every single day. Subscribe on YouTube and everywhere podcasts are found. Binge the full week over at inspireddisorder.com/plus. Buy Ray Taylor Show merch over at inspireddisorder.com. Have a wonderful day, everybody. Peace out!
Today is the day where you wake up and you realize that everything that you've been dreaming about, everything that you've been wanting, every goal and wish and hope that you've ever had can become real. Dreams can come true. What you manifest in your mind, you can bring to reality.